The conferences that really stand out would be those that plan for Monday. The Monday following the conference is always the day where the magic dissipates and the reality of running the business comes back online.
Welcome, everybody, to What's Next in Franchising. We have a very special episode today, and it could not be more timely. I'm here with my co host, good friend, CEO of Know How, and seasoned expert in the franchise industry, Leighton Healey. And Leighton, today we are doing a deep dive into franchise conferences. We
That's right.
know that franchise conferences, they're one of the most critical aspects of the calendar and a super high leverage point. Leighton, I want to start high level. Give me a rough idea of how many franchise conferences you have been to in your career.
Well, if we talk about, let's just say total volume, it's a big number. If we're talking about, I think the more interesting number is how many events from different brands have I been to? Because
Okay.
typically when you're a franchisor, you only go to your brand's franchise conference. And so in a sense, you only go to your family reunion. You don't go to other people's family reunions, right? And see like how do other people do their family reunions. So I mean, I've been to dozens of brands, conventions, conferences. They go by different names, but effectively they're all the same thing. It is an annual cadence, sometimes biannual, but sometimes it's every second year, supported by annual regional events. Sometimes it manifests in different ways, but functionally, it is a practice of bringing the whole franchise network together, or big portfolio based organizations will bring all of their brands together under one roof, and it creates an opportunity for culture and cohesion and clear messaging and in energy and whatnot. And it's for many brands, it's one of the largest outlays of capital on an annual basis. And there are some brands I know that don't do it, and there are other brands that do it. But to put it plainly, yeah, I've been able to play different roles either as a speaker or a trainer or a sponsor or the organizer or kind of or a committee participant organizing for dozens of brands events, and I like it. They're fun, and I've seen some that I think were amazing, inspiring, creative, really leveraged the opportunity, and I've seen some that were a total train wreck.
Well, we're going to do a deep dive into how franchisors can get the most out of their annual conferences here when it comes to relationships, when it comes to rolling out change, when it comes to shoring up enthusiasm and aligning the team around the brand. But first, you can't just sprinkle a train wreck story and not go more in depth. So, Leighton, I want to hear, give me just a crazy franchise conference story before we talk about what companies actually should do.
Well, I cannot share brands, right? Because that
That's
would,
okay with me.
you know,
Although it might
you
be
know,
fun to guess based on the story, but you're right. Yes, absolutely.
yeah, yeah. A conference speaker never kisses and tells, as they say, right? But I've never heard anyone say that, but maybe someone should say that. But you know what? I think that I mean, at the end of the day, there's that old adage which is, um, you reap what you sow, right? And a year of sowing, I would say, subpar franchise support and experience, stoking politics, um, all of that comes to bear at the convention. And so probably the one that I would say there's probably yeah, in my mind many come to mind. I mean, I'll give you three quick like headlines, right?
Incredible.
Um, I was involved in organizing a conference years ago where we held it at Disney World, and it did not go well. Franchisees did not behave well. We had to bail someone out of jail. We had more than one trip to the emergency room. I think my understanding, I was involved at a conference where it was at an all-inclusive in the Caribbean, and some franchisees um, in the middle of the night robbed the pool bar, and to hide their loot, removed art from their hotel room, smashed holes in the wall, filled the wall with booze, and then tried to just like play it cool while they held like late night parties in their room. And so, in both cases, banned from the resorts. Um,
Okay.
so yeah, between bailing people out of jail, between like I'll save some of the like the romantic layers that sometimes emerge. Maybe that'll be our late night episode. Um, but yeah, anytime like a franchise gets banned from a conference, anytime you're like putting a franchisee's bail on your credit card, anytime you're in a different country than your own, and you're paying for stitches because that franchisee didn't have health coverage, then you're like, I'm gonna remember this. And I was involved with an event where one time there was a charity marathon or half marathon, and I don't think that we accounted for how hot it was going to get. And I think like a third of the executives who are also the conference speakers collapsed from heat exhaustion and ended up being hospitalized. And so about a third of the agenda got scratched because the speakers were in like medical distress. So yeah, and then I've been at conferences where, yeah, like I said before, you reap what you sow, and after a year of, and probably an ongoing practice of not listening to franchisee concerns, it was like palatable. Like it was like there was a lot of tension between Z and Zor, and it boiled over. Boiled over in reception of award speeches. It boiled over in little jabs from the stage from senior leaders, and it was yeah, downright toxic. And I've seen amazing, inspiring events, but it's always fun to
Awesome.
it's always fun to click on that little reel that's like, you know, disastrous
Yeah, grab
family
your popcorn, watch from a
bar
distance.
mitzvah.
Yeah. Well, hey,
So yeah,
that establishes the floor. That's good. All right, so let's all be it resolved. Everyone listening to this podcast, we're going to aim for a better conference than that. No one bailed out of jail this year is let's shoot for higher than that as far as a successful conference goes. Like, let's talk about those conferences where you said, hey, this is an example of a franchisor that takes this seriously and is getting maximum leverage out of their conference. So I'm going to start with a pretty hard hitting question, but I think this is the right time for franchisors to be thinking about that. What is the number one opportunity that you would say franchisors miss when it comes to their conferences? What's the number one thing they leave on the table just because they're not thinking about it going into their conference?
so it would be the focus is on these broad shotgun messaging, and there's not a lot of focus on, let's call it, those sniper one-on-one conversations. So all the focus is on the presentation, the slides, the hype video, the main stage stuff, and then you tax your corporate team so much that really when they are in those very relaxed one-on-one, hanging out at the resort, hanging out at the conference center exchanges with their franchisees, they haven't really had time to contemplate how to leverage those shoulder to shoulder moments, and they just talk about sports or something that was presented the prior day, and it's a huge miss. No question, I would say, and typically, I would say an area of the event that in a sense kind of goes below the surface. But when I was leading, a large cohort of you got your regional business consultants or your, FBCs, or, everyone uses different terms. Or you have, high, let's call it high brand alignment franchisees, and, you're a very close relationship with them. My practice was, because let's just say, if if their conference is in a month or a week or whatnot, I mean, it's hard to make any material structural changes. But the good news is that the opportunity that is most often missed is still available to them. And this is what it looks like. What it looks like is, I would have, this was an annual thing I would do. I'd have all my regional business consultants, or your RBCs, or, different brands call them different terms, but essentially that kind of coach support layer between the franchisee and the franchisor, right? And I would say, hey, do it on a spreadsheet, right? All the franchisees under your charge, right? And and what I would say is, give me a column where, if you get 10 minutes with them one on one, what is one message you want to reinforce? On the next column, give me one thing you want to encourage them about, because it's so much better when you could look them in the eyes and say, hey, there's a lot of moving parts here at this event, so I want to make sure this doesn't get missed. 6 months ago, when you did this, or you made this change, or I know you had to have this one-on-one conversation with your office manager or whatever, I want to let you know, I thought that was real, And so, I mean, identify, one thing that you want to really push on them for the year, one thing you want to encourage them, and then one kind of chiropractic type thing, right? Being like, hey, I know it's new year, new cycle here, and I really love you to consider just taking that weekly, AR review meeting more seriously with your team, or whatever, right? Because, there's something about those moments where we celebrate, prom, Christmas, thanks. There's like where we're all just a little bit more flexible, accommodating, and we're a little bit, we've kind of let down our guard a bit, we've relaxed a bit, and there's those moments where I would say receptivity is sometimes a little bit higher, and so that's the leverage point. The leverage point is that, 2 weeks out, 1 week out, whatever, I would get time with each of my kind of key operators at the franchisor level, and I would look through those conversations and we'd talk through them. Sometimes we'd role play them on the ones that they say, I have a hard time really getting through to this particular franchisee. And so, and we go armed with those lists. And you say, well, that sounds very mechanical and very this, and very inauthentic. But the fact is, I think it's the opposite. It's very intentional, right? I mean, to say, hey, this is going to be the highest face time that you might have with these franchisees, in a given year. You know, each of them individually, take 15 minutes and think about each person. What is something that only you, having spent as much time as you have, can encourage them on, can acknowledge them on, can recognize them for? Because not everyone gets on the big stage, but everyone can have a 10-minute exchange at the lobby bar, or walking to an activity or whatnot, where you can just lean over and use that moment intentionally. You can talk about sports later. You can talk about your kids sport, your kids music recital later, right? Those things matter, but this is one of those few opportunities where you can arm your team to be able to have very targeted, high intention, high leverage conversations. And again, I subscribe to the difference between being manipulative and being someone who is persuasive is, what is your intention? And if your intention is because you're trying to somehow, sneakily, then this is the wrong tactic for you. But if the intent, which I think the intent of most people who get into that kind of franchise or RBC kind of FBC role, is they have a deep care and concern for their franchisees. And so thinking at a very granular level across those three categories is a huge unlock for events like this. And then if I was to add a fourth column, it would be, who can I connect that person with at the event that I think would strengthen them, refine them, sharpen them, or create an opportunity for cross-pollination on something important, be it a value, be it a brand point, be it a business concept, whatever that is. But to me, when I went into that conference for the franchisees, it should and it should feel like, and I think it's appropriate that it should feel fun. It should feel like they are the center of attention. It should feel like we have really put in a lot of work to make this special and memorable and impactful for you, right? The franchisee is the customer, and so it should feel like we have put you at the center of this. For the corporate team, for the franchisor, this is work, right? Like this is work, and it should feel like work, not for tedious, but more of like an effort outlaid. And so this is the opportunity to be able to, grab that franchisee from another region, who has made progress in something that your franchisee is really considering, and how do you make sure that they're at the same table together, right? Or how do you kind of create and curate those connections, or how do you use your influence as a leader to maybe get them in front of for 15 minutes with, say, the CEO of the franchise network. Whatever that looks like, I really think that is a high leverage opportunity. And again, whether your conference is next week, in 3 days, or in 3 months, you have time for this, right? This is something that's very practical, and I've seen it to be a very effective. And then here's the key: the key is that if you have that, if you take that tactic, then you need to plan time, say a week after the event, to then circle back and be able to debrief on those conversations, and to be able to get a sense of, okay, what was the reaction, what's the follow through, what did we commit to, how do we maintain any momentum that was the result of unsticking something that may have been stuck.
Leighton, you have such a unique perspective on this because you started your career as one of the highest performing franchisees in your network, and then you went over to the franchisor side where you really thought about, hey, how do we hit all of these goals that you just talked about? And then now for the last decade, you've been on the vendor side and you get to go to dozens of events in a year. Most people listening to this, they will not have the luxury of attending their competitors' conferences. You have that ability. You see it from all angles. You've seen it from the attendee, from the organizer, and now from the sponsor, seeing how everyone does it and the different approaches in the industry, what works, what doesn't work. Give me some of those characteristics of the best conferences that you've been to, like the ones where you're like, hey, they have thought about this, they came to play, and they are going to hit their outcomes and they're going to be higher performing on the other side of this conference. What are some of the characteristics that you've seen in those?
Yeah, I think that um, in all of the fog of war that is preparing for a franchise conference, certainly a missed opportunity at the franchisor level is to lean over to their vendors, especially the primary sponsor vendors who they know are involved with all their competitors, and just asking, "Hey, what can you tell me from my peers in the industry, right? What can you tell me that doesn't betray any confidence with your client, that they are doing that seems to be working perhaps better than what we're doing at this conference, right? Would you consider attending my conference, both from the lens of reinforcing your value proposition and whatever your outcomes are, no question, right? It's got to be a good business outcome for you. But would you also commit to just catch 15 minutes with me at the close of every day, or perhaps an hour after the conference, and just offer me some candid feedback around, at the end of the day, franchise networks can become, and this is maybe a bit of a sharp word, but they can be a bit, let's call it intellectually insensuous, like incestuous, like in the sense that, like, their ideas only breed with their own ideas, if that makes sense. And so, like, their ideas reinforce their ideas. And so I don't know if, like, you know you know intellectual incestuousness is like maybe a term that's applied to something else in psychology, but that's the first thing that came to my mind,
I,
is like,
I don't think that term's ever been applied anywhere, but I'm picking up what you're putting down. An echo chamber would be another less
yeah, an
creepy way
echo
of describing it.
chamber.
But yeah, yeah.
Yeah, 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 right. And so at the end of the day, I know what it's like to be in an echo chamber where, we just keep rolling around the same concepts we've had year after year and making what we believe to be iterative improvements. Um, when in fact, we don't really have a lot of like off the island feedback, right? And how would you get that feedback, right? Like you're not gonna like pretend to be a franchisee and sneak into your competitor's event, right? But your vendors are there, right? And so again, important to ask it in a way that doesn't ask them to betray any confidence that they have with another client. But I don't think there's anything inappropriate of just saying, could you highlight a few areas that you observe from our event that you think perhaps some of our peers in the industry have just taken a creative, innovative, different route approach, and you thought it really created a great experience or great outcome for that network or for their franchisees. And I think it's important that you don't just put them on the spot, but you actually ask them in advance of your event and catch some time after your event so they can kind of stew on it and think about it, right? And I think it's helpful if you also help the franchisor or the vendor understand. So, what are your goals? Like, what are you trying to drive? Because something that they might think needs improvement might just be reflective of something that you've deprioritized or something you've prioritized. So that's a long way of saying, what are some of the things that some of these franchise conferences that I think just really punch above the rest, what do they bring to the table? Um, I would say off the top of my head, three things come to mind. First is the best events balance um, full network activities that create cohesion, alignment, and enthusiasm. And yet they balance that with individual touches that make sure that each owner, each partner, depending on what lingo they use, feels cared for, feels seen, and feels like they matter. So, what does that look like? Well, tangibly, that often looks like being able to do activities that create a sense of enthusiasm. I think that especially conferences that leverage a lot of multimedia, that I think evokes a lot of emotion around shared themes, around shared messaging that have been a red thread since when they first went through, let's call it franchise discovery days, and determined that this network was the right fit for them. So, I mean, there's been this red thread of reinforcing themes. And so I think multimedia within main stage general session, industries that or brands that really invest in that, and in this whole world of generative AI and stuff like that, I think that the cost and the restrictiveness of that has really come down. And so on the big scale, I would say the multimedia can be a big tool that evokes emotion and togetherness, a little bit of tribalism, all that's healthy. But then on the individual level, what I've seen, I'll give you just a couple examples. One is, I've seen things done in the hotel rooms, right? Personalized messages, perhaps from their franchise business coach, perhaps something that was done with enough advance notice that, say, a senior leader was able to actually perhaps do a handwritten card, passes the lick test, you know what I mean? Or sometimes I've seen things where, some events, make it possible for families to bring children, and they've taken steps to be able to also create opportunities or activities for those children. I mean, when I've seen, I won't say which brands, but man, I was at an event and they encouraged their franchisees rather than detracting from their families, leaving their families at home, but to bring their families. And then they had an entire side of the conference geared towards making sure the families had a great time. They had daycare, they had activities, they had stuff, like they had things so that the spouse who wasn't as involved in the conference could also do some touristy things. It was amazing, right? And at the end of the day, those types of personal touches, consider for the fact that I'm often away from my family, consider for the fact that I as an individual, signed up for this franchise, and yet I'm part of the whole. So the balance, I would say, the balance between the high level and the individual. Conferences that do that well are no question, they punch above the rest. And I can get into a couple other things.
Let's do it. Let's hit those. You've got such a unique vantage point. Let's take a minute or two on, those points 2 and 3, and then I want to leave you with a question that every franchisor should be asking themselves as they go into their conference. But let's go deeper. What are some of those unique characteristics among those top performing franchisors that you've seen them uniquely leverage their conference in order to get the most out of their franchisees?
Mm. So the first one is, you know, the first one would be franchise events that balance, these broad scale, cohesion building, connectivity building, themes and activities and experiences, balancing that with the individual touch. The second one, no question, would definitely be franchise conferences that respond to the reality of the world around them. And so, what I mean by that is franchise conferences that acknowledge that, for example, right now we're living in this world of explosive and rapid acceleration of AI technology, and so conferences that speak to that and speak to that, or they've arranged for individuals to come to the event and speak to that. I think that otherwise it can feel kind of like, the franchise is deaf or blind to, let's call it, just obvious trends or patterns or macro events. And it doesn't mean that you respond to every kind of buzz, trend, or knickknack. But I think that there are some big macro events that I think need to be considered for. And so that often looks like a senior leader speaking to it. That often looks like perhaps a panel of really high brand aligned franchise owners and operators on stage, speaking to kind of their reaction to it or how they're acting upon it. And sometimes that's required, a bit of an offstage alignment around, again, what is the intent of that message? And so we make sure that we are, in fact, driving that forward. So I would say that's probably the second thing. And then if I had to pick a third, I mean, the list is long in terms of those who really outperform. But I think if I would say the conferences that really stand out would be those that plan for Monday. So what do I mean by Monday? Is the Monday following the conference is always the day where the magic dissipates and the reality of running the business comes back online. The inbox is overgrown. The staff issues that you left are still there. And now it's all the work of, let's call it, uh, implementing, operationalizing, and bringing to life all this inspiration and all this tactical stuff. So conferences that from the outset design for how are we going to address the Monday after the conference, meaning ensure that everything from the training, from the messaging, from the interactions is approached and presented in such a way that it solves for implementation, right? Opera, the bringing to life of these kind of key things is the big difference between what I would say is all that capital, time, and energy washing out and just draining through the reality of a busy franchisee's business, or it actually sticking and catching traction and having an impact. And I think that's, I think that's one of the areas where I particularly, having been in that position, that some of the genesis of know-how, one little thread of the genesis of know-how is experiencing that, the outlay of energy, time, just like heart and soul, and then, 3, 4 weeks after a conference, really not seeing any measurable impact in the numbers, right? And feeling that disappointment that did we just have a ton of fun and just burn a bunch of cash just to have a big hurrah, but it actually didn't really move the organization forward from a performance standpoint. And so, some of what that looks like is, when we partner with a franchise brand, we really become the AI knowledge infrastructure that their playbook, their system kind of really lives in very securely. And so you can imagine how different it is when you walk into a workshop and the person is presenting some type of a sales or some type of a project management or some type of a leadership type activity or course or skill, and or they're introducing a new software partner or whatever it is. And then for them to be able to say, and before we get into this, remember that the implementation, the how to that we're going to cover today, it already lives inside our company's playbook, which is often how they refer to know-how, right? And so people in the class are being, trained. They're getting excited, and then they're on their device, bringing it up and looking at the processes, the workflows, the how to, the training, the work, everything involved in being able to move this concept to action within their teams. And sometimes you'll see them like sending it to their teams and say, I'm in a workshop right now, buckle up. Like, here is a system, here's a process, here's a new training, here's a new something. Here's how location X has built this whole playbook, and now we have access to it, and it's coming to a device near you. So brands that solve for Monday, and I think that technology can play a great role in terms of kind of breaking up anything that can be kind of calcified following a conference. I think that they definitely punch above their weight class because they get great ROI for the conference.
Yeah. Well, speaking of getting great ROI for the conference, that tees me up for our final question. And, I know you're a big questions guy. The right question can unlock a lot of leverage. And so, what is the one question that you would encourage anyone who works for a franchisor going into their conference to be asking themselves? What's the one question that should be in their brain going into such a unique opportunity for high impact with their franchisees?
Hmm. Yeah, if I was the CEO of a brand and I was on an all hands with all of my franchise staff going into a conference, probably the question I would ask them is, I would say, as you go into this event, a question I want you to hold in your mind is, before you open your mouth in every interaction at this conference, I want you to ask yourself, what if the question you're going to ask, the word of encouragement you're going to provide, the insight you're going to drop at their feet, what if that is the only conversation you get to have with them that year? What would you say? So if that was just the norm is actually this is the only time you get to speak to this person, considering for the priorities of the organization, the need for them to be successful as an individual business owner, considering for, let's call it, just the complexities and the hardship of business ownership. What would you say, and how would you use that time intentionally, if you could only, if the next time you're going to talk to them is next year? That's probably what I'd say.
Great question. It's a great question. And I bet it's going to redefine a lot of interactions between franchisor and franchisee if they have that front of their mind. Leighton, as always, really appreciate your expertise, you lending your decades of experience in this area with us and the listeners. If you're listening to this and this has been valuable for you, we've got a lot of other great topics coming up. There's always news to talk about. We've got interviews with the top franchisors in the industry coming up as well. So make sure that you're subscribed to this podcast wherever you're listening to this right now. And if you want a weekly summary of the biggest headlines in franchising, head to what'snextinfranchising.com. What's Next in Franchising.com. That's where you can subscribe to this newsletter. You're also going to get alerts when we have new podcast episodes, so you'll be the first in line to listen to the expertise of some of our top peers in the industry. Thanks everyone for tuning in to this episode. Thanks, Leighton, and hey, all the best for your upcoming franchise conference. Hope that it's been helpful. See you, everyone.